Doncaster. There's some real passion in this party, isn't there? People who are putting themselves forward, putting themselves up for scrutiny, and they're doing it not because they want careers in politics, not because when they were at university, becoming an MP was the sole purpose of their existence. They're doing it because they believe in the country. They're doing it because they believe in democracy. And they're doing it because we have been so appallingly let down and betrayed by Westminster in the last 3.5 years. Now, in the 2015 general election, I was leading UKIP. And of course, there was a certain Mr. Miliband. You've heard of him, yeah? Who was leading Labour. And I came to Doncaster and I went to a working man's club. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I popped in there, the racing was on, a few beers on the go. So I went in, I met people, had some pretty lively debates with people who mostly voted Labour for the whole of their lives, but some were beginning to wonder whether the Labour Party was still for them. Anyway, about 300 yards down the road from the working man's club was Ed Miliband's constituency office. So I said to the bloke that ran the club, "Oh, you must see Ed Miliband quite regularly in here." "You've got it, haven't you?" "This lot are so far ahead of any other crowd in the country." And he said, "No, Ed Miliband has never been in." And it was the first time I'd realised that Ed Miliband and these London Labour politicians who represent northern constituencies literally would not be able to have a normal conversation with their constituents, that it's a Labour Party of Dalston, not a Labour Party of Doncaster, and that actually they've just been able for decades to take you all for granted. And that was then. That was then. And in line with that change that was beginning to happen, the UKIP candidates in Doncaster were scoring, getting up for 25% of the vote, which was pretty amazing, you know, given how politics has been dominated by two parties for so many years. But let's fast forward to this general election. A lot of things hadn't happened in 2015. We hadn't had the referendum on EU membership. And we hadn't had a Labour Party who promised us during the referendum, after the referendum, and in their general election manifesto of 2017, the Labour Party promised us at all of those moments they would respect the result of the British people and implement it. Well, what do they want to do? They want you to vote again. They want a second referendum because they don't think that you understood what you were voting for first time round. Did you know what you were voting for? No, you didn't. You're thick, ignorant peasants. Honestly. The people in Islington know much better than you do. But isn't that where Labour are? Isn't that effectively what they're saying? And just to make a complete nonsense of it, Diane Abbott spelled out. That's the easiest line anywhere in the country, Chairman, that one. I mean, if they're not warmed up, just say Diane Abbott, folks, all right? So, it is tough to keep a straight face, isn't it?
Try.
And she summed it up on Question Time. A Labour government will negotiate a new deal, will then put that deal in a referendum against Remain, and campaign against the deal that it had negotiated. I mean, you couldn't make it up. The truth is, Labour want to give you the choice of Remain versus Remain. That is what we are really talking about, and what we want. It's very obvious. When you leave something, you leave it. And we want a clean break from the institutions and the courts of the European Union. We want to be an independent, self-governing, proud nation. It's simple. That is what we want to be. That is what we voted for. That is what we are fighting for. And I think it's fair to say that Labour have literally betrayed their own voters and broken their promises. But not just on the specific issue of Brexit. It's interesting that the 2017 Labour manifesto said free movement of people will end. Now, one of the reasons that we voted Brexit is because of the sheer vast numbers of people coming into our country. Of all the countries in Europe, we've always been by far the most welcoming, by far the most tolerant country when it comes to immigration managed at sensible and proportionate levels. You know, we've got an amazing debt in some ways to those 50 countries in the Commonwealth who in World War I and World War II provided 40% of the UK's capability. So we as a country have not had a problem with immigration from 1945 until Mr. Blair got in. And since then we've seen the population rise by 6 million people. It is rising by 500,000 every single year, and 80% of that is a direct result of Labour and Conservative policies over the last 20 or so years. And we voted in that referendum to take back control of our borders. And the second big betrayal, of course, is that now the Labour conference this year have voted not just to keep free movement with the European Union, but to extend free movement to much of the rest of the world. Literally no controls whatsoever. And I think one of the things that has happened with this massive rise in population is actually our quality of life has diminished. I'm not arguing pounds, shillings and pence here. It may well be that mass immigration is good for the big employers because they can pay people as little as possible, which is what they want after all, isn't it? But has it been good for our quality of life? Has it been good for congestion on our transport systems? Has it been good from even getting a basic GP appointment, which in parts of the country has virtually become impossible? So I think that's the second great betrayal. It's on immigration, and I do think at this election we should be telling Labour candidates that their position, their breach of promise on both Brexit and on the immigration issue is absolutely unacceptable, dishonest, and we're going to teach them a lesson at the ballot box, aren't we? Now, when it comes to the Conservatives, the one thing I can say with certainty is that if we hadn't set the Brexit party up earlier this year, Theresa May would still be Prime Minister. We would still be limping along, becoming the laughingstock of the world. And the fact we formed this party, we stormed to success, as you know, in the European elections, that got rid of Mrs. May. I think it also stopped at that moment the huge momentum that was building up for a second referendum. Remember, that was the talk every day, wasn't it? You know, 500,000 people marching in London and all the rest of it. I think we did reverse that. And we've now shifted the Boris Johnson position significantly. You know, he has said in the Conservative manifesto that we will leave next year. He said in the Conservative manifesto we'll go for a simple trade deal not based on political or regulatory alignment. I'm very happy with a trade deal with Europe, aren't you? Trade is trade, but not to be bound by all of their laws. So we've shifted, Boris, a very, very long way, and that is a massive achievement. It would not have happened if they weren't very, very frightened of us. But the other big job we've got to do, here in Doncaster and across these seats that voted 70% leave, across these seats that are represented by effectively Remainer Labour MPs, across these seats where Labour want you to vote again. I know we're going to take a huge number of Labour votes in these seats. But to win, we have to make the argument to the Conservatives living in these constituencies that the Conservatives have never won here. The Conservatives will never win here. That we are the challengers to Labour, and if they want MPs in Westminster to hold Boris to account. Because, you know, Boris is good at making promises. Yeah. But we've got to make sure that he actually keeps them. And it's only having our voice there that will guarantee it. So I need you to help me by going out and spreading that message to people who are inclined to vote Conservative. People who perhaps like Boris, but make the argument in these constituencies, if you're a Leaver and you vote Conservative, it's a wasted vote in Doncaster. The vote for Brexit is for the Brexit party in these constituencies. If we can get that message through, I know we can win these seats. Not only will many Labour voters vote for us, I'm also sensing, and you know, just look at Jeremy Corbyn on the BBC last night. Did you see it? I mean, he is completely in denial, isn't he? Completely in denial. His friendships with Hamas, his friendships with Hezbollah. I mean, a very, very extreme cult has taken over the Labour Party. He doesn't look like a Prime Minister. He also, and I'm being told in Yorkshire by people, had it from several people, that actually the man is effectively an IRA sympathiser to boot. People feel very strongly about that. So I think not only will lots of Labour voters vote for us in places like Doncaster, I think lots of Labour voters will simply stay at home. They will not be able, even if they voted Labour all their lives, they will not be able to vote for this man who does not look like a Prime Minister and who frankly is not fit to be a Prime Minister. So history is what it is. Massive Labour majorities in these areas. But I think back to 2015, if leading UKIP, we managed to get 25% of the vote from nowhere before these Labour betrayals, and given the frustration there is now amongst the people of this country, I tell you what, we're going to get very, very big scores in these seats. We really are. If we can get those Conservatives to vote tactically, to vote with their brains, I think we can get some across the line. But I want to just finish with this one point. Getting Brexit, getting our country back its independence that incidentally should never, ever have been given away in the first place, in my opinion. I really think my parents' generation were conned. You know, if my parents had thought, that effectively what was called a common market would finish up wanting its own army, they'd never ever have voted for it back in 1975. But the idea that after Brexit, that everything goes back to the way that it was, just isn't good enough. What Brexit has shown us in the last 3.5 years is that we now have a 19th century set of political institutions that are not fit for the 21st century. And you will hear nothing from Boris. You'll get your questions in a minute, I promise. You will hear nothing from Boris, nothing from Corbyn, nothing about reform and change. They want the system to stay exactly as it is. They even want to keep a postal voting system that has shown itself again and again to be open to fraud, intimidation and abuse. We want to scrap the register and go back to people that work overseas or are infirm. The voting system itself, we must have some degree of proportionality. It cannot make sense that some parties might get millions of votes and literally no representation at all. And the one that really personally I think has now become repugnant is the way in which people within political parties are rewarded or bought off by being given peerages. The House of Lords is out of date. It needs to go. So we'll campaign to make sure we get a proper Brexit, not just Brexit in name only. We will campaign to change politics for good, to re-establish that bond of trust that needs to be there between the governors and the governed. You see, at the moment, they are the masters treating us like the servants. But in a democracy, it ought to be the other way round. The Brexit Party will fight to make sure that we, once again, are the masters. Thank you very much.